now on to our distinguished speaker. You know him from Fox News. Every weekday, you can see him on the most popular morning show in the world, Fox and Friends, with his co-hosts Steve Doocy and Elizabeth Hasselbeck. He's also the host of a radio talk show, Kilmeade Friends, which can be heard all over America. He's also the author of several books, including 2 on sports, It's How You Play the Game, and The Games Do Count. And in 2013, he published George Washington's Secret Six, The Spy Ring That Saved the American Revolution. He now has a new bestseller. It's called Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, The Forgotten War That Changed American history, which he'll talk about tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, a great man and a great American, Brian Kilmeade.
Thank you. Brought a lot of stuff with me. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight, especially, a crowd like this at the Nixon Library. I should just stop speaking now. My night's already been made. Although it did hurt my feelings a little to see how loud the applause was for the imminent return of Greg Gutfeld to the Nixon Library. And of course, I'm going to have to let him know that it was promoed, and you did respond louder for him than you did for me. And finally, he'll finally get the confidence. He's always been lacking on Red Eye, The Five, as well as this weekend show. But really, this is fantastic. I would just love to be able to get in to tour the Nixon Library rather than be a featured speaker. It's just, it's a little surreal for me, especially because I lived out here for 4 years, and I would drive by through here because I worked at All Sports Radio, Mighty 690, which has since gone Spanish, so they might be talking sports. I just can't figure it out. And I used to drive by, and I used to know the library was here, and it would be kind of cool, and I wonder, I got to stop by one of these times, but I was always blitzing down there because I was working at a TV station in Los Angeles. So it's just great to be here. We also realized we're in Santa Barbara that Justin Bieber had a concert, and Disney had a special. And we looked at the map, which is, by the way, a handy way to get where you need to go these days. And I thought, if I'm at the Reagan Library and got to get to the Nixon Library, and I only have a certain amount of time, what if I don't make it? So I convinced the publisher, thanks to Victoria, who I've tortured on this trip, who's done a great job with guest booker, we should get a helicopter. But I was hoping it would be a helicopter that could seat more than 2. So we basically were in a VW with a propeller. And it was fantastic, but I got here in an hour. It's amazing, and to have a chance to see California for that perspective is certainly special. And of course, on the way, as we're about to lift off, we get that horrendous news about the attacks in France. And I'm supposed to be at work tomorrow. It's not going to be able to happen. I'll be there Sunday. But 158 dead, and sadly, I think the number is going to climb, at least 6 attacks. And as you look at the attacks and where they came from, my history book is all about what's happening today. And you guys know that, and I think the rest of the world is beginning to understand it. But Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates is really Thomas Jefferson against the Tripoli terrorists. And these terrorists are not just bad people. They are Islamic extremists who not only go going after those who would want to be free in the Western culture, but they also torture Muslims. The life of the Muslim around Tripoli, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria is terrible. Those people are abused, they're repressed, their life is hell. And what they see is these terrorists with the power and the ruthlessness and the bloodthirstiness there to repress them. So just to backtrack, let me tell you how I got here where I am today. I started as a sports guy, and I'm doing all sports with a passion for news. And out here I'm doing news and I'm filling in on sports. And then when I got back to New York, had a chance to do sports there for a while, but my passion's really news. And even when I was doing Sports Phone, which was 976-1313, before All Sports Radio, if people had to have their scores, they would call into this service. So every 10 minutes you would update because, let's be honest, people gamble. I just heard about this. I've never seen it. And they had to know how much money they're losing for their family and their future. So I would do different sportscasts every 7 minutes, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And I started, when the Persian Gulf War started, and my sports maniacs that I'm working with, I said, guys, do you want to make some money? instead of 976-1313, try 976-2525 war phone. They go, well, who knows about war? I do. So I would do updates every half hour, an update of how many sorties are over, how many tanks Saddam Hussein had left, how many troops were deployed, how many French were involved, and what was going on, the quotes from Bush, and take the actualities instead of from Michael Jordan, take it from the Secretary of Defense Cheney. And that's when I realized, man, I like sports, but I love the news. And when Fox News started, they said they need a sports guy. And Fox Sports goes, we want you to be our sports guy. I go, I could be one of 1,000, or I can go to Fox News and be one of one. And then when things started going crazy with the election mess, and of course with the Bosnia War was probably the first thing that started to preempt me, and then the election mess in 2000, the cold bombing that followed after that, then 9/11 were actually on the air, it became clear that I could do what I really wanted to do was all news. And thank goodness Roger Ailes said, I have no problem with that. Not only do you get to do news, you don't read the prompt till you get to talk about it, which means you got to go in depth on things. So it's not enough to say, well, it looks like Saddam Hussein has again pushed the United Nations over the edge. Why? What's the history? Why did that matter? What is the history behind this? How did he come to power? And I realized it was so important to know the history of these things, not just to know what happened that day. And by the way, it's no secret that every president, after Richard Nixon left office, was calling Richard Nixon each time to get a perspective on why things happened, and what about the relationship you had with this leader? Can we tap into that in order to maybe move ourselves forward? And everybody was doing it, not just Republicans, but Democrats, and Bill Clinton would say the same thing. So as I get a chance to cover the news, something else happens. This guy named Glenn Beck joins our station. It's awesome. So he would open up a show, and he wouldn't open up the show and just say, hey, let me just tell you why the economy's collapsing. He'd go, let me show you some black and white footage. Let me show you the Depression. And I'm thinking to myself, man, this is interesting, but no one's going to watch this. And they did, because he gave you long form, where you came from, where we're going. Now, we're passionate about the news. We're passionate about history. But when you get people who drive trucks and who are at Wall Street and who have owned delis, and they're talking to me about this, then you know you did something. Because you're giving the average American people who are too busy raising their kids, raising their family, trying to make ends meet, you're telling them what's going on and giving them a perspective at the water cooler or at the truck stop. And then Bill O'Reilly says, I'm going to pump out a book on Lincoln. I'm thinking, well, that's great. He has a passion for it, but no one's going to buy it unless they just want to be Bill O'Reilly's fan. Which, by the way, he demands. He is so much bigger. He is at least 7'7". That's how tall he is. And once in a while, he remembers my name, so I'm happy. So it sells. And people go, man, I didn't know about Lincoln. I didn't know more than one person was shot the night Lincoln was shot. I didn't know what was really at stake and what the main issues were. And then he does other books. And I thought, I had this other story that's been in the back of my mind. And it happened really, I was on 25A. Anyone familiar with Long Island? There's a historic thoroughfare, 25A. And one day I'm actually waiting there because my dad owned a bar on that block, and I took a train and I walked down the block. Always like to check on the bar, and I'm waiting at the corner, and I see some guy painting a line on the side of the road by hand with a guide, like with a steel guide, and they're walking down the road doing that. And I said, sir, no offense, but I thought a machine did that. He goes, well, it does, but you know, we're a historical society. We don't have a lot of money, and this is going to wash away. And I said, well, what are you doing? Well, this is the passageway that George Washington took to thank his spies. I go, what are you talking about? I went to Long Island University, grew up in Massapequa, Long Island. If anyone knows what happened in Long Island, it would be me. You would think if we had an educational system, they might say, let's not visit the organ at Radio City, let's find out about George Washington's spies. After all, it's loud and big, and I don't really want to hear it. So I had to look into this. So it was 1989, and I went to the library because the internet wasn't really big. People actually had to go somewhere to read and actually had to pull a book out, had to work a card catalog. And I went for this book, it wasn't there. And I'm glad I didn't, because it was about a 400-page book, and it was all about Washington's spy letters. And I probably would have lost interest. But I found a young adult book, more my speed. 100 pages, told the story. I closed it, and I asked the woman, is this real? Is this fiction or nonfiction? And they're like, knucklehead, you're in the young adult nonfiction, and by the way, you shouldn't be here. So I would tell a friend of mine who worked at Dell Computers, and he couldn't believe this story. I asked another friend that's a pharmaceutical sales. He couldn't believe the story. He couldn't hear enough of it. I go, man, we got to make this a movie. Out comes the Patriot. People watching Mel Gibson, they watch that movie. I go, I got a better story, and it really happened. He screwed that one up. And then I watched The National Treasure, which was fantastic, with John Voight and Nicolas Cage. I go, I got a better story, and you don't even have to make it up. So I meet with Don Yeager, and we have a sports background together. He says, Brian, let's do another sports book. And I go, if we pursue this like an investigative story that we got to get done on Fox. So I pursued every avenue, all my contacts. I tried to press the uncovered part of the story. I found the daily planners of the spies of that day. Boy, they covered it up. They had to write everything down because they didn't have a monetary system they can count on. They had to literally do trade. So they would have little things about certain times when the letters were delivered and certain things happened in the war, and we were able to move the story forward. And we published it. And to be honest, Bob Barnett, who used to deal with Richard Nixon, George Bush, Bob Woodward, he deals with the best of the best. So he is representing me on this, and he goes, it's a good story. It's a niche story. For historians, I don't know who's going to buy it. But Bob Barnett gets everybody to return his calls, and we have 3 people interested, 2 bid on it, so we got to do it. He's like, listen, Brian, that's more than you're ever going to get. It's not going to be a big seller, but it's going to be a great accomplishment. So here it is, George Washington's Secret Six. It was a bestseller for 19 weeks, on paperback for 9 weeks, and was as high as number 3. If Bill O'Reilly wasn't so good, it probably would have been number 2. If Charles Krauthammer wasn't so smart, it probably would have been number 1. But at one point, we were 1, 2, and 3. I do not belong in the same breath with those 2. I absolutely don't. Well, thanks for fighting me on that, okay? You could have pushed back. First time you quiet all night was after that. That's when I really needed you. So you know what it showed me? It didn't show me that there's a whole bunch of people that like Fox. It showed me there's a whole bunch of people that believe in the country and are very patriotic. They need to know in detail why we are an exceptional nation, because suddenly it's in question. We're not rooting for the home team. That's for the Angels or the Dodger fans in the area, or for me, the Met or Yankee fans. We root for the home team for better or for worse. We root for a country because we know on some level, all of us, not just the people in this room and your relatives, that when we were born in America, we hit lotto. Whether you're lower class, middle class, whether you're upper class, whether you're a kid of Donald Trump's wealth, or you're a kid that's growing up in a first generation with parents who don't even speak English. Sooner or later, you look around and you say, oh my goodness, I can't believe how lucky I am. Then you get this thing called cable television, and then you get the internet, you look around and you should be saying, I cannot believe how lucky I am. Because you see what the rest of the world wants, what we might take for granted. And we shouldn't be blamed for taking it for granted. How are we supposed to know how great it is unless we get some relevance? Unfortunately, we're losing some of that relevance. I hope this book gives people a relevance, because they see what happens when a bartender, when a longshoreman, when a farmer, when a printer, when a grocery store owner, and an Agent 355 who could have been a housewife, mother of 3, single parent, who decides to work for this spy ring, decide that this idea for a country was more than just an idea. It had to work. And they were willing to put their lives on the line to work behind enemy lines in New York and in Long Island, in the nexus of British power, in order to overturn this country and turn it back to us. And George Washington knew he could never square off with the British. He tried that once. He almost lost his entire army. He'd had to outspy the British. The first quote I have in this book is, George Washington didn't outfight us, he outspied us. Didn't that make everyone say, who are these spies? They lived and died, got no acclaim and credit. Richard Nixon lives and died. Gerald Ford lives and died. Ronald Reagan lived and died. We will know them for generations. They're part of history. But I tell you that that America is made up of those so-called average Americans who do extraordinary things and recoil at the thought of getting praise for it. And that is why this book resonated, because we're made up of Americans who are so-called average, everyday people who do extraordinary things for the country because they believe in the country. And when you look around, you wondered also, on some level, that it has to be that God is pulling for us. And I'll give you the example from this book before I move to the new one. So everyone told me that this story was as mythical as George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. But I'm going to research it, and I'm going to find out what is myth and what is real. And one of these stories is this. We have a lot of success at Bunker Hill. We showed the British we're willing to fight, we know how to fight, and we're going to be relentless. But the British knew they're in a fight. And they're going to square off with us in New York. And Washington knew that too. So he got his army, said, stop celebrating, we got to go to New York and fight. And everybody files in, but so do the British. They send their armada down from Canada, and then we see the size of these ships and the number of troops, and Washington knew he's in a heck of a lot of trouble. He gets pinned in Brooklyn. And behind him, if you're not familiar, is this river. And we can't go anywhere. So Washington has to do something he doesn't want to do. He's got to retreat to fight another day, or he's going to be wiped out that day. Night falls, he's got to get out. The weather's bad. The merchant ships show up to pull him out, but they can't get in the boat, so it'll be like their death sentence, they'll drown. Mystically, at 11 o'clock, the waters calm down. In come the ships, military and civilian, and our guys start moving out. The British don't suspect a thing. We're like church mice, in and out, in and out, in and out. Bottom line is, we're only halfway out, and the sun's coming up. Out of nowhere, the word is a mythical fog rolls in that allow the U.S. forces, the Continental Army, to sneak out, get into Manhattan, and get out. And the day they get out of Manhattan is 9/11. And the word is, Brian, you don't believe that story about the fog rolling in at 6 in the morning, allowing the troops to get out? I go, well, I do. They go, well, you know, prove it. And I'm about to give up on the story, which means I'd have to leave it out. When someone told me at one of these museums, the Spy Museum outright by Stony Brook University, she goes, well, it happened. I go, yeah, I know. I just got to prove it. He goes, Benjamin Talmadge wrote a book. Now, Benjamin Talmadge, I hope you don't know. I'm sure you don't know, but he's one of the stars, American stars that nobody knows unless they study the Revolutionary War and have a test the next day or a doctorate due at Yale. And Benjamin Talmadge, at the urging of his kids, right before he died in 1846, said, Dad, you fought by Washington his whole life. You told us these stories. Please write it down. So he wrote it down. And he said, so thick was the fog that rolled in, you could not see 4 feet in front of your face. He wrote it in 1840. He lived it in 1778. Boom. Well, how does that happen? You can rationalize it all you want. It makes no sense. We escaped to fight another day. We wore them out. We win the war. These spies function over the next 4.5 years flawlessly. Yet when I went to Langley to research it, they told me they did more during a war than we would expect our agents to do after go through training, and we put them into a war. Average Americans doing great things. And to tell you the truth, I know I reek of the word average. A B student that tried to be an A student, a good athlete that tried to be a great athlete, a guy that wanted to go to the best college, went to a good college. The only thing that we can control in our lives, I've come to the conclusion, although I'm still willing to learn, is our effort. You can control your effort. You can't control everything about you. I could do everything I can to get here. If I drove from Santa Barbara, I never would have got here. So that leads me to this book. So this book has unbelievable success, but I want to be a one-hit wonder. I go, listen, I've had one idea since 1989. Give me a break. So I go, Brian, what are you passionate about? I go, well, I'm really passionate about the war on terror. And I go, I got a story for you. And I go, I know the Barbary Pirates, but it's been done. He goes, not like you can do it because you have this depth of knowledge because we were talking about bin Laden at Fox even before bin Laden hit. We understand what's going on. I have the privilege of meeting a lot of the Navy SEALs and intel officers that everybody gets a chance to hear. I bend their ear in the green room. So I have a sense of the depth and the breadth of what al-Qaeda wants to do. But I didn't think I'd be able to dig up quotes from Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and George Washington as they tackled the same issues that we are today and that the French are in the middle of right now. I didn't know that I could take Thomas Jefferson's quotes, put them in the Washington Post, put another name underneath them, and people would think they fit in today's day and age. Now, I know this says Thomas Jefferson, the Tripoli Pirates, but this is no fun pirate ride that you're going to find up the road at Disney. These are terrorists, and their creed is terror. And what they use as an excuse to inflict that terror is the Quran. And are they bastardizing the religion? Yes. And by the way, they're bastardizing religion because the guy that they're dealing with at this point is Thomas Jefferson, one of the few in America that read the Quran, studied the Quran, because we were having this debate in this country of what kind of country we're going to be and what role religion was going to play. So let me flash it back to 1785. We are buried in debt. And we're free of British rule. We're also free of the British security. And guess what? On the British's earning, I'm sure, with a wink and a nod, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and as well as Tripoli, we now know as Libya, decide, we're going to hit America. This country has no navy. They have no history. And you know what? They got to get their economy growing, and they're stupidly going right through the Mediterranean with no security. Next thing you know, the Dolphin's taken, DAU, P-H-I-N, and then the Maria is taken, that crew would be held for over 10 years. But not just imprisoned, they would be tortured. And one of the pages I have in the book that I insisted on being in the book was their page of tortures. Evidently, they had trouble remembering them all, so they wrote them down in sketches. So I put them in the book because that's what our guys were going through. Officers were treated slightly better. And the problem was we didn't know what their problem is. And they said, basically, you're an infidel, and according to the Quran, we can attack you, plunder your cargo, take your ships, and enslave you because you won't convert. Unless, of course, you want to pay us money. And that was called then tribute. We call it extortion. So Adams has a chance to meet with these guys, the ambassador over in England. He finds them pretty amiable. He thinks he's going to be able to cut a deal, get our guys back because America's terrorized with 13 colonies, no president, no constitution, no real leader, just a bunch of smart guys who we empower to get things done. So Adams meets with him, and he comes out of the meeting and says, I think I get something done. Call in Jefferson. Jefferson comes over from France. They go and meet. At which time they are amazed to find out that they want an extraordinary amount of money, and they're going to want jewels, and they want consistent payments. And by the way, that's just with Tripoli. When they hear what you give us, you're going to have to cut through them 3 more deals. So we don't have the money. We're buried in debt. We don't want to pay this money. We're Americans. That's not what we're about. We just fought for our freedom not to be enslaved by somebody else's payment plan in international waters. So they walk out of there, and Adams says, you know what? America does not have the stomach for a long war. True. And if we're going to fight them, we must choose to fight them forever because it's not going to stop. That's true, too. Well, Jefferson has a different opinion. Jefferson thinks if we pay them now, we're going to just have to pay them more, and if the attacks stop for now, they're just going to start again. And he recommends that we commission a Navy and we fight them, and we provide security. He believes if we go on what he calls constant cruise, they're not going to attack us because we're going to be able to have security, and he is not really that impressed from what he sees and what his emissaries are telling him. Guess who wins that fight? Adams. So we start writing the checks. And like Marco Rubio, most of the checks are late. Just like to make it relevant for today. I don't have anything against them. Most of my payments are late, too. And they're not happy. They're always on edge. We're not happy making the money. By the time Washington is elected president, 20% of our GDP is going to these terrorists, these Islamic extremists. Washington says, hey, Mr. Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, write me up a report. Tell me where I go from here. They write up a thorough report. He doesn't conclude and tell them what to do, but what he says is all points should lead to we got to stop making these payments. But we're missing something, a Navy. We have no ships. So Washington says, let's pass the Naval Act. Let's start making some ships. Let's go to school on what the British did, go to school on what the pirates have, see what the Spanish have, and see what the French have. And let's make better, faster, quicker, stronger boats. And we did, quickly. When we finally have the boats, we signed some Treaty of Tripoli. It's not really effective, but Washington says, don't stop making the ships. When Adams takes over, he's got about 30 ships. So it's time to fight, right? Adams is a little freaked out by his multiple meetings and what his counselors are saying. He ends up fighting a quasi-war against France. Nothing against John Adams. You can respect his decision. Just like you might be able to look at Clinton's decision, Bush's decision, Barack Obama's decision about the same situation and say, well, I see what they mean. When Jefferson takes over, he knows it's going to happen. He's going to stop the payments and they're going to declare war. And Basha Karmanali takes great pride in being the first foreign nation to declare war on this upstart country that seems to be full of resources, a lot of gumption, and eventually was going to have a lot of money. Jealous. Without congressional approval, Jefferson's got to send his ships over, but he can't start the war. Our rules of engagement say blockade, don't shoot unless you're fired upon. Ooh, rules of engagement that hamstring a military. Does that sound familiar? So Washington is thinking about what to do next and trying to get momentum behind it. Finally, Congress 2 years later says, okay, go ahead and fight. Then we got the wrong guy in charge. We had Captain Dale in there. He was fine, but the blockade didn't work. The Corsairs were getting through. They were taunting us. They're suffocating the Tripoli economy. It wouldn't be effective. Showing power would not be enough. Using power might help, right? So put another guy in charge, Admiral Morris. The problem with Morris is he brings his family with him, his wife and kid. And he's visiting capitalists. He's having a great time. He's talking about America. He doesn't want to fight either. So quickly, Jefferson, because he had Facebook, he was able to find this out. I got to get a new guy in there. Does that remind you of Lincoln in the Civil War? Rotate out your generals. Don't panic. Keep moving. They get a guy named Edward Preble. And my hope when you see this book is that you maybe buy it for Jefferson, but when you close it, you're going to be talking about William Eaton, Stephen Decatur, and you're going to be talking about Edward Preble, that most of you guys might know about, but most Americans don't, but they should. So Edward Preble brings the fight to them. He has Stephen Decatur at his side, and they're taking out these ships, and they're letting them know that the bombing, they're hitting the, bouncing the cannonballs off their fortress on shore. This fight is going to change, and we up the ante. But the problem is, the reason we get them to the table, why? Because all these leaders care about is their own security. They don't care about their own people and their own carnage. They have 303 of our guys when the USS Philadelphia gets captured because it runs aground. And they're all being tortured. And we got to get them back. And America can't believe this foolhardy Jefferson who lost 303 of our guys, unable to win a war. A war that all of Europe doesn't want to fight, and Adams says we shouldn't be fighting. Tough to be a leader in America, in democracy. You got to see what they were saying about each other. Everyone gets so down because we're fighting now. This is nothing. At least we weren't shooting each other because we disagree. Leaders. I'm talking about leaders. So it's going fine, but we're not making progress. We got to change. We got this idea 3 years ago, prior, that Jefferson thought was crazy. We got this guy named William Eaton. And I brought this book with me. And it's his biography. And it's from 1813. You know how much I got this for on Amazon? It took me a year, $112. And it bothers me because it should have cost me a lot more. Because when you find out who William Eaton is, you realize he belongs in the top 10 Americans of all time. William Eaton at 15 decides it's time for me to join the revolution. He goes into war, gets sick, goes back again. Then goes to Dartmouth, couldn't really afford it, sold the buttons on his coat, sold literally individual little pins in his shoes just to stay there. And then he decides he wants to go back to war and trains under General Mad Anthony. Extremely bright, extremely experienced, learns the tactics. He's also a brilliant linguist. He learns the Indian, Native American dialects. He's able to communicate with them and see how they fight. He studies them, studies us, and he's going to school on this. He's impressing everybody because he has got the courage of 100 men. He's got the smarts of every Ivy League you can imagine, and he's got the ambition. And this Senator Pickering likes this guy. And we need some crazy guy over in Tunisia who's not going to be intimidated. I think I got the guy, William Eaton. He sends him over there. And William Eaton can't believe we're not fighting them. He's like, these guys are paper tigers. They're nothing. You got to stand up to them. His quote, "If the Congress does not consent that the government shall send a force into the Mediterranean to check the insolence of these scoundrels and to render the United States respectable, I hope to resolve at their next session to wrest the quiver of the arrows from the left talon of the American eagle and substitute a fiddle, bow, or a cigar in lieu." It's a badass. William Eaton says, bring the fight. So James Cathcart says, he's over in one of the other Barbary powers. He's over in Algiers. Said, I know how to do this. This is the opposed leader of Tripoli. His name's Hamid. He's the rightful leader. He was thrown out. They killed the older brother, did this Yusuf Karmanali, and he's the middle brother. They kept his family hostage and threw him into Egypt. Maybe he wants his job back. Let him swear allegiance to us and go put him in power. It's our first covert operation, right? First CIA. So Eaton says, sounds impossible. I'm the perfect guy. So he tells Jefferson. Jefferson's like, we're not doing that. You're crazy. Well, after 3 years of being a stalemate, Eaton goes to see Jefferson. Jefferson goes, here's $20,000. Take 1,000 muskets. We never had this conversation. He gets on the Argus. He goes into Egypt, doesn't even know where to find this guy, even if he wants to fight. What he goes through is a book in its own right. It's all chronicled in his own words to his buddy who put this into paper 1813, but he died in 1809. I'll get to that in a second. Eaton gets to that. He finally convinces this guy to fight with the handful of guys he has, but he also brought somebody along with him that's important, a handful of fearless Marines. And these leathernecks knew exactly what had to happen. They had to go 500 miles through the desert and take a major city. Shouldn't be a problem. So they get some Greeks, some Italians for the personality purposes, and by the way, they're great cooks. I don't mind stereotyping. When you're half Italian, you can do those things. And they go 500 miles without maps through the desert. They get to the city of Derna, which is walled off, and they realize they're outnumbered 2-1. What do Marines do when they're outnumbered? They charge. They take the city in 2.5 hours. They put up our flag. We have taken the first major city in our history. We've looked at Islamic extremists in the eye, and we said, you have nothing on us. Who is this upstart country with so much pride and stubbornness that they will not be denied? They pound us on the shore for 3 years, and now they take a major city. Next up, Benghazi, then Tripoli, you're going down. Well, Tobias Lear, who's a dicey character at best, former aide to Washington, goes over to Jefferson, sees an opportunity. Word goes out that Carminelli thinks he's about to be overthrown. He wants to cut a deal. Sadly, we cut a deal. We get our guys out for $60,000. Eaton is stuck in Derna. And all these people that had this brief hope of Derna, that of a life of freedom and maybe of hope perhaps, like the people of Iraq had a glimpse of, it turns out he's got 24 hours to evacuate, get in the boat, or we're leaving you here. And he has to let down Hamid as well. Do you see what we've done today? It's the same thing we did back then. It's the same thing, and they're all mistakes. So he gets in the boat, he comes back, he's so brokenhearted that his destiny got tripped up. He ends up drinking himself to death in 1809. We lose a great American. Before he did that, his letters are put and bound into a book because no one can believe this guy. As a reward for his heroism, they give him 10,000 acres in Maine. It wasn't enough. His destiny was to take this city and restore pride to America. It took James Madison, after the War of 1812, to take it finally and get complete victory in all 4 of those countries. Not only did he go by with his Navy, that fresh off standing up and staring down the British, one by one, he took those countries, got all our guys back, freed everybody else's people, and they paid us for the inconvenience. In the end, a sign of the times, to know that Brian Kilmeade isn't just pro-American or Fox loves America and you can just count on them just to say how great we are. How about Pope Pius? He was moved to extol the actions of Decatur and his men. Decatur was the key guy under Preble. The American commander, with a small force and in a short space of time, has done more for the cause of Christianity than the most powerful nations of Christendom have done for ages. This is America at its best. Jefferson didn't write a lot about it because he had this other thing in his resume called the Declaration of Independence, Governor of Virginia, President of the United States, Louisiana Purchase. It's easy to get buried. I want to unbury it. Not for Jefferson, but for Eaton, Decatur, and Preble, and so many others. Because America is not made up of just the Founding Fathers. It's made up of people like you who fight for the country every single day, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the newspaper and editorial, or anything else. Because you're here today, not partying like I know most of you would be clubbing tonight. But you're here listening to me talk because I'm cute and I have dimples. And I'm half Italian. Thank you very much. So, and my last thing, and there's nothing I could teach you guys about life. You've already experienced it. You've had your success. You've had your families. There's nothing I could ever tell you about life. But what I have found and what I want you to take away from this book, I'm not here to tell you, wow, my book's number 3, and I hope I get a lot of people to come to the Nixon Library, or this was here for 18 weeks. All I could tell you is that I got extremely lucky in 1997, hooking up with this unbelievable organization called Fox News. As much as I'm proud of these books, they have given me the opportunity to talk about these books. I don't think I would have gotten the deal. I wouldn't have been in front of you if I didn't get somebody who picked my tape out in 1997 and said, I want to give this guy a shot, and then allowed me to make the transition to news. I am the luckiest guy around, and the only thing that I will take credit for is I try. And the only thing you could ever control is your effort. And that's the one thing I've concluded. The most successful, smartest people don't necessarily aren't the happiest with the most money. It's the people that put in the effort and appreciate where you've been, and you'll never see a more appreciative person than me. If it ends tomorrow, I've done more than reach my goals, and I got a chance to even be the opening act to Greg Gutfeld. So, and that's it. I would like to say it is the American way. It is the American way to try to be number 1. It would be kind of interesting if we went from 3 to 1 this week, and I would give you guys full credit. Okay? But I also want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. Hopefully they're embarrassing. Hopefully they're too lofty and I could kind of pretend to answer. But I would like to give you an opportunity to do that because I know a lot of you are here because you spend all day fighting for America during the week or fighting for a political party during the week. And I know you have opinions. Your opinions count. I do a radio show from 9 to noon. When Tony Snow went to the White House, I was lucky enough to get it. So from 6 to 9 I get to talk. From 9 to noon I get to talk. It is your time to talk. All right? So who wants to ask a question?
We're going to get our first question right here. I want to let everybody know that we'll go through this Q&A, and then Brian has been gracious enough to make himself available for autographs and pictures in the front lobby. Our first question.
Hi, I came on the wrong night. I thought this was for Greg, but no, I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I came on the wrong night. I thought this was for Greg.
Oh, that is
But no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I work with high school students, and I'm really worried about the lack of patriotism in our country. What is your suggestion? What can we do to, focus on?
Well, that's a great question. I get that everywhere I go. I'm happy to say that I was in I've only done a few book signings, general book signings, but I was in Fredericksburg and I was in McLean, Virginia, and I saw a lot of kids. I saw your last book, I want to read this book. I saw a lot of homeschooling people coming up to me saying, I want this part of the curriculum. What I would try to say is this. Even if you're a math teacher or a science teacher, you're involved in education, some people might say, I got the brain for science, I got the brain for social studies, I got the brain for English. Do you have the brain for stories? Do you like to watch movies? Tell a story. Tell a story in an exciting way. Don't get caught up in the naval military history or the background or what Hitler's hobbies were. Get right to the point. People are engaged in stories. I know the thing that prompted me to write this book is I'd be telling people these stories that I didn't even knew I was on the news, and they'd be leaning in. Really? I didn't know that. When did that happen? I'd be interested in that. So I think that if you could tell the stories and tell them it's about America and you have every reason to feel prideful because that's your country, I think we could begin to work it up that way. So you don't necessarily have to have the brain for social studies or English. You just got to want to hear a story that you could feel pride in. And I think that's what you could do. I mean, listen, you guys are active anyway. Let everybody know it's not okay not to have standardized testing on social studies. It's not okay to keep gutting out history. And just let them know. Also, I torture my kids with these documentaries. I make them watch. And you know what? I don't really have to make them watch that much anymore. They're kind of into it. When they come home and they say, yeah, we did War of 1812 today. Fort McHenry, I pretty much knew it. You gonna thank me? But they like knowing. They like much more. I would just worry about a family at a time, an extended family at a time, and those Thanksgivings, instead of watching the Lions lose by 22 points in the first quarter, maybe use that opportunity to start talking about it and do it. Listen, you're used to grassroots marketing. Let's do it from the grassroots level. Why is this book number 3? A lot of people don't even know I'm on Fox. They're just watching it because they want to know about American history.
Our next question, outside aisle to your left.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for coming. I was just wondering, your book on George Washington, does it have any bearance on the show Turn?
Yeah. It was well done. It was high production value. It was just one of these things that, ironically, my book rolls out when Turn rolls out. Alexander Rose did a great book called George Washington Spies. I used it as a resource. We kind of moved the story forward. But that has nothing to do with his book. And I saw him, and I said, Alex, did you say anything? He goes, I can't fight every single scene. Evidently, he signed the book off the rights. And they made it into, in my humble opinion, a soap opera in Revolutionary War garb. And I don't think it's right to make Abraham Woodhull's father, who's the farmer's dad, you made him a loyalist? Really? All of a sudden, these people are having affairs with other people? No, they weren't. I understand that Hollywood's got to sometimes create some things for action, but you don't really have to create that much for action in this. So the one thing I would do, if they're ever going to make this a movie, and let's do this together, I will definitely have a role in it to make sure something like that doesn't happen. But the worst result happened. Turn didn't have high ratings, it didn't have low ratings, it had medium ratings. So they brought it back a second season, which killed anything of making this into a series. So in a few years, I want to see if we can do it in one major movie.
Hi. That book that you read that was the 100-page young adult, what was the title of
It was Purple. You know, I forgot the name. I forgot the name of it, but it was Purple. I could see it in my head right now. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, do you know the book I'm talking about? It was written in the 60s. Oh. I'm going to find out who it is because I kept stealing it. Because it would pop up, I'd write it, I'd take notes on it, I'd show people, they'd go, what is the quick thing? I'd gab it back and forth. And the woman's around. The woman contacted me when the other book was released. I'll get you that answer. Do you come here a lot? Okay. I'll get it to you guys.
Right here in the middle.
Brian, according to your book, by 1815, the pirates had largely been removed from the sea. We had effected a victory. I'm wondering, was there a connection or was there any influence by America's victories in the Mediterranean on the terms that we negotiated in the Treaty of Ghent ending the War of 1812? Because they seem to have arrived at about the same time.
They did, and here's the deal. I can't give you the exact timeline, but basically Madison said, before you get undressed and put your swords away, go over the Mediterranean, because during the War of 1812, they started taking our ships again. They blew up every deal, was all null and void. So he sent Stephen Decatur, Edward Preble, William Bainbridge to lead the fleets over there. And so awesome was the display and so experienced were our guys that they said, okay, we'll pay you and you can have your guys back. But it was right around the same time. By the time we're done with this era, America is a force. And by the way, here's what's good about the Barbary Wars. We made a lot of mistakes during those wars. We didn't make those mistakes in 1812. We were actually an experienced Navy by the time we were ready to take on the British.
Next question.
Since Thomas Jefferson read the Quran, had these dealings with the Islamists, did you find any place where he expressed an opinion about Islam?
He had some different, I read Denise Spielberg's book, Jefferson and the Quran, and she seemed to soft pedal his hard, firm stance on the Quran. He had trouble with all religions. So I was starting to study that aspect of it, and then I started to stay in one lane because Jefferson is probably the most diverse, complicated guy in the history of man, so much smarter than I can ever imagine. But he seemed to be confused by a lot of the doctrine. He seemed to understand how it could be misinterpreted, but he never thought it was an evil book that should be banned in America. In fact, they had this long debate, should a Muslim be president? And when we were having that big debate, who started that? Was it Ben Carson? Hey, guys, don't condemn Ben Carson. Our original founding fathers were debating the same thing. And guess what? They yelled at each other, they argued, and it was okay to debate things openly and try to get to the bottom of it. And the bottom line is, as long as your loyalty is to America, you could be president of the United States.
Next question.
Thanks, Brian. You have one leg up on Geraldo. I don't know if you heard him tonight, but he said, as much as I hate war, after the massacre in France today, I'm ready for us either to take them out before they get us.
Take them up or what?
Take ISIS out before they get us.
Okay. You know how long I've been saying that? I mean, and I know you think that. I said, this is what I said to Senator Kaine the other day, a Democrat that seems to be sobering up. He said, I watched him on C-SPAN because I'm lonely, and he was talking about war and how we have to take the fight. When 9/11 happened, everybody in this country knew we were going to Afghanistan, and we knew exactly where bin Laden was, between two cities and ultimately Tora Bora. We waited too long, but whatever. We knew exactly where it was. If we get hit significantly like they just did right now in France, where are we going? Raqqa. Well, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for them to solidify their country. They have a tax system. They have a judicial system. They are trading on the black market, and people are buying from them. What else do we want? I mean, what are we waiting for? We got to send a message, and 55 guys, even though they're elite and they're awesome, are going to do nothing but get themselves killed because they have no protection. So what are we waiting for? We're watching a world in which America has backed out. And how's that going? Russia is taking up the oxygen, and so is Iran. And guess what else happened? There's been some retribution. See what happened in Lebanon? Because Russia sided with the Shia, and Iran is propping up the Shia leader of Syria because we've done nothing for 5 years, they're going to start blowing up people in Beirut. But okay, let's just stay out of it. Let's not bother with it. Let's pretend as if we had nothing to do with it. Let's pretend that it's okay to kill 350,000 people. Let's just pretend like we're not America. We're going to be Fortress America until all of a sudden we continue to have lacrosse players shot in the chest because they're American by somebody who's mad about the Iraq War. We're going to continue to have military get gunned down because they're not allowed to have guns in recruiting offices and they happen to go out for lunch. Let's just continue to allow this to happen. I mean, this isn't somebody who's a warmonger. We have an enemy that wants to fight us, that will be relentless in doing so, and we don't want to be pincushions.
Next question.
Good evening, Brian. Yeah, I just wanted to know, in my experience, what I've read with, and all the, it seems like in that area of the world, all they really respond to is power or force. All right, who do you think is the presidential candidate that would best be in, for our country?
Well, I will say this. Rand Paul scares me, but I will say I appreciate the fact that he believes what he believes. He's not going to flip-flop like other people who are debating tonight or tomorrow night. I respect that, but he scares the hell out of me with his foreign policy. Donald Trump has been on my show, now on our show, on our network, every Monday for 4.5 years. We take him out to lunch every, get this, I take a billionaire out to lunch and I pay. I am an idiot. To thank him for his contribution, but what he says about foreign policy scares me a little bit. I think Ben Carson's still working his way through. The guy that seems I'm not saying he's not going to be the perfect one. I'm just saying he's not there yet. But the guy to me who's the most learned, that's made the most sense so far, is Marco Rubio. Ted Cruz kind of goes back and forth, but I think he's going to be there in the end standing. I mean, there's 15 to go through, but I'll say up from the main stage. I mean, I'd be very confident with Governor Christie from the second stage in terms of our international. Did you just boo me, or was it Governor Christie? And Jeb Bush sounded pretty certain today, although in the past I'm not, too sure. I think that Jeb Bush is overcompensating because people are really upset at George Bush's foreign policy, 43s. I'm not, but Jeb wants to make sure that he actually gets elected or doesn't get elected, so I think sometimes he's not acting instinctively. I probably shouldn't be saying that, but you asked me my opinion. But I'll tell you, I was very impressed for a 42-year-old guy who a few years ago was a Speaker of the Florida House, who's now 4 years into his first term. He really has impressed a lot of people I've asked about foreign policy because this committee he served on, and I think he says a threat. Now, I don't know where he's going to pay for his $1 trillion increase in defense spending, but I'd like to try to work it out with him. So, because I think that we got to defend our country first and find a way to do it. I'd work an extra day for a war tax. I would give more of my money if I know it was going to the military. You promise me you're going to lean out the Pentagon, you're going to straighten out the requisition process, you're going to stop duplication of jobs, and you get lean and mean just like these units that are so effective when the war actually starts. I would work an extra day. I know most of us would. I would take money out of my account and give it to the war fighters, but I don't want to give it to other people to pretend to give it to the war fighters so they can have a cutting ceremony where most of it doesn't go there. But again, I don't want to get involved in the Syrian civil war. I get you, I get that. But ISIS is not the Syrian civil war. They're their own enclave. They've cut out a place in Iraq and Syria. They're saying, come and get me. Not only that, they're telling Russia, come and get me. Now they're telling France, come and get me. How many times are they going to come knocking at our door? They're asking to be annihilated. Can we please let them be happy?
Next question.
Brian, you see a lot more photos and information from over there. One thing I noticed is ISIS, almost all their vehicles are Toyotas. All of them. Trucks, the others. Rather interesting. Our dollars are going over there. And then we have the oil that they're playing with, and that affects our whole economy.
Absolutely.
Everything, all the way down to everything we touch.
This is the time of the year where all the 2015s got to go. So, I know, it's a great point. I don't know who's selling them. It kind of bothers me that they're riding around in our stuff, too. And the reason why they're riding around in our stuff is not because we didn't do a good job training the Iraqi army. We left too soon. They weren't ready. They needed our leadership. A lot of them were more than willing to fight. The minute we left, they became a Shia force, which the Sunnis will not tolerate. We warned them over and over again not to do it. President Obama ran on 2012 on bringing peace to Iraq, and Joe Biden said it was one of his greatest accomplishments. I'm not exaggerating. One of his greatest accomplishments. But do you see how it's all related? We go halfway at everything. So that's a good point about Toyotas. I would like to know who's selling them. You know, I also noticed, too, that our coalition fell apart. They just lost interest. It's kind of interesting. I never heard of a coalition losing interest, right? March, they haven't bombed since March. Really? Could you have told us you stopped bombing? Why? Because on some level, the Sunnis are kind of happy that the Sunni terrorists are terrorizing the Shia terrorist, Assad. You get it? Bizarre.
Next question.
Yes, the University of Missouri is very upsetting to me as a former teacher. I think the universities have to start taking a stand against these protesters. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
A favorite teacher offered to quit just because they're protesting that he's going ahead with an exam. I mean, this is just going to get worse and worse and a snowball and be throughout the country.
Right. I think they're embarrassing themselves, these students. Did you see one on with Neil Cavuto the other night? Free public education for everyone. Well, who's going to pay for it? The 1%? Well, what if the 1% are already paying 40%? Plus Obamacare, that's 44%. How much more do you want them to pay? Sooner or later, they're going to leave. They don't become the 1% by wasting all their money. He goes, well, somebody else will get it. They're clueless. Listen, I don't know how much I knew at 19, but I knew I didn't know everything. I wish they would felt the same way. So I think that some college has to stand up, and I guess it's not Claremont McKenna. They just rotated somebody out, which is unbelievable to me. So it's going to be the next college has got to stand up, and I think you got to start exposing these students who are in their protective zones and these idiot professors who are screaming for muscle when a student reporter wants to get the real story. What an embarrassment that is. Why that professor has a job, I don't know today. But you're right. But you know what I hope? I hope this is Democrats and Republicans see the same thing. The I get a trophy for everything generation wants something else for free because they've never done the math. You can't get something for free unless you find a way to pay for it. And by the way, if you can't afford a college, a four-year college, you go part-time to a community college. You get your grades up so high that any four-year school in the area might give you a grant to go there because they want you as part of their alumni. And if you get into Yale and can't afford Yale, you go somewhere else. That's the way it always was. You don't blame people. It's nobody's fault. You might be frustrated, but welcome to life. I'd rather be frustrated at 21 than befuddled at 42 when nothing has gone my way.
We have time for one more question. I want to just remind everybody that he will be, Brian that is, will be available in the front lobby to sign your books. We have books for sale in the museum store. Get them, get it signed. Great, great, great copy. I encourage you all. Our final question.
Brian, isn't the old saying, history will always repeat itself? Yep. When are we going to turn that around, or when will it ever be turned around?
Maybe today is so horrific with 156 dead in France. By the way, France is cracking down on their Islamic extremist problem. And they are laughing at us because we're backing out of the Patriot Act. Maybe today we'll realize that. And maybe if we ask for all the nations to come together, that our nation will actually have a president that shows up, because we didn't show up the last time France was bombed in the Charlie Hebdo disaster. So maybe today's the day. All right? And maybe we could do it before all these refugees come here. They might be great people. I would like to know if they're great people. All right? I'd like to do a background check.
Thank you, Brian. Before he goes, I want to present a gift to him, but only if he promises to have it on the set of Fox and Friends. It is a one-of-a-kind, What Would Nixon Do coffee mug.
All right.
Although it's one of a kind, they are for sale in the museum store. I encourage you to grab one.
All right.
Let's give him another round of applause. Brian Kilmeade.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.